Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. And today, Jean-Claude Juncker is going to the Oval Office to meet Donald Trump to discuss the tariff wars, the disputes going on between the European Union and the USA. We're told there will not be any press conference, but to be a fly on the wall at a meeting of two men whose worldviews could not be more different, similarly with their social habits and their whole outlook on life. So that one, we'll find out maybe later on tonight whether any progress in the relationship has been made, but I wouldn't, if I were you, hold your breath. But the story today that really grips me, and it goes back a few years in its origin. Do you remember when the story broke about what had happened in Rotherham? An independent inquiry told us that over 16 years, 1,400 local girls had been targeted for sexual exploitation. And, the report said, the abusers were said to be almost all of Pakistani origin. It was, I think, when it broke, one of the single most shocking things I've seen happen in this country in my lifetime. Sad to say, other towns and cities have had similar problems, but this one was the first one. This one was the biggest one, and this one, I think, really did shake the nation to its core. The Member of Parliament who took over that constituency was one Sarah Champion, and she wrote in the Sun newspaper last year, Britain has a problem with British Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls. There, I've said it. Does that make me a racist, or am I just prepared to call out this horrifying problem for what it is? Well, now, nearly a year on, there is a building, growing reaction to what Sarah Champion has said. And Andrew Norfolk, who's the chief investigative reporter for the Times newspaper, who, to be fair, above everybody in British journalism, is the one that uncovered the scale of the abuse that was going on in Rotherham and deserves very great credit for doing that. Andrew Norfolk today in the Times has written that Sarah Champion now has been given increased security amid fears that the hard left and Muslim opponents are trying to force her from office, and clearly there is a feeling that there is a direct threat to her. And some of the stuff that is going on in Rotherham against Sarah Champion is really vile. She's been accused of industrial-scale racism, and all of this from a local charity named Just Yorkshire that is campaigning against racism, that has just received a donation from the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. This, the trust, set up by the Quaker 120 years ago, that really got in the news when it gave £300,000 to Cage, if you remember, a human rights group who described Jihadi John as a beautiful young man. Well, Just Yorkshire, the leader, Dr. Tufail, has accused Sarah Champion of inciting and inviting hatred against minorities. And the list goes on and on of the things that are being said about Sarah Champion. They are doing their best to force her out of that seat as an MP. Indeed, Taliba Yassin, a Momentum supporter, and until recently a member of the Labour-run local authorities cabinet, and she's the one apparently that they would like to succeed Sarah Champion. And she said about Sarah Champion, she has betrayed an entire ethnic group. So the words are, betrayal, the words are racism, the words are division. There is a really very, very nasty campaign going on against Sarah Champion, and it's happening because, I remind you, she wrote in the Sun newspaper, Britain has a growing problem with Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls. I want to know from you, was Sarah Champion right or wrong to air this view? Please let me know what you think. And if you think she was wrong to say it, that it was too divisive, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, do you know what? All she did was tell the truth. That was what the independent inquiry had found, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think her direction of travel was right, perhaps she got the wording wrong, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook, you can comment there too. And I am particularly keen to hear from people here who are members of the Pakistani community. Is it right that an MP writes these things in Britain's biggest selling daily newspaper? Let's go to Syed, who's calling from Bromley. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, was she right to express these views?
Certainly, she was right. I'm from Pakistani origin.
Yep.
And she was right. You know, you have to say as it is. It's got nothing to do with racism. These people were convicted by the court of law. And so they were of that part, you know, from that part of the world. But what I have to say is these people were not Pakistanis. Please do not label them as Pakistanis. They were Kashmiris, okay? None of them came from the mainland of Pakistan, right? This is part of the Kashmir, which is still considered as disputed. It's neither Pakistan nor India.
Hang on a second. It may be disputed, but it does have legal status, surely. It is part of Pakistan still, isn't it?
Prime Minister, Nigel, he has his own Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He has his own president, okay? So...
It's not an independent state as such, as recognised by the United Nations, is it?
Neither is the Kashmir in India, but both sides are disputed territories. These people are not from mainland of Pakistan, and I will not accept them as Pakistanis.
All right, I hear what you say. I'm not sure that I absolutely agree with it, but answer me this. Whether we label these people that did these appalling things Pakistani or Kashmiri, what do you think about the things that are now being said by local anti-racism campaigners about their MP?
Well, obviously, they need to go and have their heads checked. If this is happening in their community, they need to come out and stand against this and make sure this doesn't happen. Okay, it doesn't matter whether they are white, black, red, yellow, whoever they are. This is wrong, and it shouldn't happen. And Islam forbids this sort of thing, this sort of things. Okay, these people call themselves Muslims. They are not Muslims. Okay, these people.
Saeed, you may say they're not Muslims, and you may not, as a Muslim, wish to recognise them as such, but they call themselves Muslims.
Well, they can call themselves, but their character, their acts do not portray what Islam teaches.
So why is it happening? And why has it happened, not just in Rotherham, but in other towns and cities around the UK?
Yeah, if you look at it, Nigel, the areas where it's happening, that's where majority of the people living are from the areas known as Azad Kashmir.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry.
Majority of them, they come from Mirpur or whatever.
All right. Even if your contention is right, why is it that Kashmiri men appear to be doing this in numbers disproportionate to the size of their community?
Probably their families need to teach them to respect women. What the Islam says, you need to respect women. Okay, they are probably not taught those things at home when they're being brought up.
Well, but why would it be just that community?
I have no idea, because I don't have much to do with that community.
Right.
You know, I'm from mainland Pakistan.
Yeah, and I can tell that you feel...
There's hardly anybody convicted from Lahore for this sort of...
Okay. No, I'm hearing you, and I can tell there's some considerable antipathy between you and the Kashmiris.
No, I have nothing against them. But the thing is, when people say these are Pakistanis, they don't consider themselves Pakistanis. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people, Kashmiri people. When I went to university, I had friends who were from Kashmir. Mm-hmm. Well, when you talk to them, you know, they don't call themselves Pakistanis. They don't call themselves
No, Saeed, you've raised an interesting term of definition as to who this group are, and I thank you very much indeed for your call. Abbas is calling from Redbridge. Good evening to you.
Hi there, good evening, Nigel. Nigel, I am from Indian Pakistani origin, but born here, so I can't really identify myself so much as from the Pakistani or Indian community.
Uh-huh.
I see myself more as a British and English community member, because I lived here, born here, bred here, and was educated here. I think a lot of Pakistanis and Indians who are born here, like myself, actually do identify very much with this country. So I can't really claim that I'm
good, Abbas.
the Indian community.
I have to say, the more I hear of that, the better, is my view. But Abbas, I mean, what she said here, what she wrote in the Sun newspaper was very strong stuff, but it was an expression of the truth, wasn't it?
And that's the problem, you see. It's an expression of the truth. Did you know that 100% of paedophile rings are white? And some 84% of paedophile gangs were Asian in that community. And that's the problem, you see. When you start pushing out statistics and building up an inference, a conclusion from those statistics, you have to be very, very careful how you do that. Because otherwise, what you start to sort of paint this picture that just because intrinsically you are from Pakistan or from India, you're more of a pervert. And that, quite frankly, is quite insulting. I'm not saying that.
Well, I don't think Sarah Champion.
Community, Nigel.
No, I don't think Sarah. I don't think Sarah Champion meant to say that. I really don't think she meant to say that. But she meant to say there is a real problem here, and we need to call it as it is. And your comment about total statistics on child abuse. Yes, there are many more white people committing child abuse than there are people of Pakistani origin committing child abuse. I understand that, but then. How many people in this country would identify as being Pakistani? A few 100,000. How many white adult males are there? Many millions. Maybe 15 million or something. Maybe 18 million. So Abbas, we can't run away from the fact that there has been a real problem here.
I don't think we should run away from it. We should definitely address these issues. And these vile individuals, as far as I'm concerned, never see the light of day. But another very important factor, Nigel, is that apparently this was going on for 14 or 16 years.
Yes.
And the police and the authorities were not, effectively dealing with the issue because they were afraid that they would be called racist.
I know, and that almost is as bad as the crimes themselves. Abbas, I thank you for your point of view. Please keep your views coming. I'll be very interested to hear any more perspectives on the terms Pakistani or Kashmiri for the men that were involved in these abominable acts in Rotherham. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on NBC. It's 7:16. Well, Sarah Champion's criticism, her highlighting that British Pakistani men are raping and exploiting white girls, those comments have led to a lot of condemnation, attempts to remove her from office by some in her Rotherham constituency, and us having a debate about whether she was right to say it or not. And when you're an elected politician, what you say does matter, because people do listen. And somebody else today with strong views is Conservative MEP David Campbell Bannerman. Now, you may have heard there's a debate going on about whether the Treason Act should be updated to include returning jihadis. It wouldn't bring back the death penalty, but it would put them in prison for life, as opposed to very short sentences that many of them serve, if they serve anything at all. And Campbell Bannerman today has said, it's about time we brought the Treason Act up to date and made it apply to those seeking to destroy or undermine the British state. OK. This means extreme jihadis, but it also in the future should mean those working undemocratically against the UK through extreme EU loyalty. Well, as you can imagine, this is provoking something of a response, and many saying that this is dangerous populist rhetoric. But David Campbell Bannerman's view is that once we've left the European Union and we become an independent country, those that want us to give up that independence would be committing an act of treason. Strong stuff. So back to Sarah Champion. Was she right or wrong to say what she did? And a lot of views. Sarah Champion was quite right to speak out about these evil deeds. As so often happens, people suffer for telling the truth, is what Ron from Walderslade in Kent thinks. She is wrong. I get from Jazz in London. As a Sikh, I'd like to point out it's not just white girls. Sikh girls are abused too. Nigel, I think the only reason that Labour are doing this to Sarah Champion is because they're worried that the truth will come out and cost them votes, says Steve. And on Twitter, you cannot label an entire ethnicity as rapists and predators. It's not just racist, it's completely absurd. Strong opinions on both sides, and I'm continuing the appeal, particularly to hear from those who are part of the Pakistani community, how they felt when they saw those words that Sarah Champion had written. Let's go to Atis, who's calling from Wimbledon. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well, but I'm actually feeling, I have to tell you, I'm feeling a bit sorry for Sarah Champion. I mean, she's had the guts to say we've got a problem here, and the fact that her security now has to be stepped up, the fact that she's being accused of being racist and divisive, I have quite a bit of sympathy for her.
Well, yeah, that's very unfortunate. Everyone in a democratic society should have the right to say what they want. However, I would say in the position that she's in, she needs to be responsible, and she was either very naive in what she wrote, or perhaps she took a leaf out of your book, Nigel, and wanted to create a sensationalist kind of headline by completely maligning a group of people. In fact, not a group of people, a complete country of people.
Okay, well, Aziz, let me just Let me just remind you what the independent inquiry concluded. It concluded that over a period of 16 years, 1,400 local girls were targeted for sexual exploitation. Their abusers were said to be almost all of Pakistani origin. So there is a problem here, isn't there?
See, the problem is the wording. See, you've kind of like highlighted.
Well, I've quoted. Okay.
Yeah. No, exactly. I'm going to use exactly what you said. You said that report did not say white girls. It said the local community. At the end of the day, whether it's white girls, Sikh girls, whatever, it's abuse. And whether it's Pakistani men, white men, or it's abuse. And the issue is, why is it not the case where other abuses of, for example, white Caucasian men who fly to Thailand, documented abuse and rape of young children, why is that not an issue?
It is an issue, but it is an issue. But what is truly shocking, Atis, about this is Rotherham is not a particularly big town. You know, Rotherham is a town with a population of about 120,000, and yet within that relatively small community, you know, the numbers involved here are enormous. I mean, this was, when this story broke...
It's one child or 100 children.
No, I don't agree with... I'm sorry. I really can't agree with that. You know, what was happening here was organised. It was happening, frankly, on an industrial scale within one northern town. Is Sarah Champion... Now, you may say to me that the wording was wrong, that the wording was too strong, but surely she was right to identify something that really had been up until then an unknown phenomenon.
No, but why, like you said, it's an issue up north. So, yes, it was Pakistani men up north.
Well, hang on. Why does that...
Pakistani men aren't exclusive to the north.
Why? I couldn't care less whether it happened in the north or the southwest or in Scotland. That isn't really the point. It just happens to be that Rotherham was in the north.
But that's what you're highlighting, though. You're highlighting...
Well, of course I am, because that is...
Well, exactly.
Of course I am, because that is where... Because, listen, we've had similar problems documented in Oxford, OK, which is very much more in the south. But this was the first big such case. And that is, I'm asking you... OK, let's turn this around. What do you think, as the local Member of Parliament, she should have said about this?
She should have said there is an issue with children being abused. Yes, it's organised. What they need to do is find out what was the root cause. Now, their ethnicity, they were British born. So the issue is not that they're of Pakistani origin. The issue is that the British born men were doing this, and British men do this, whether they're Pakistani, whether they're of any ethnicity, they do it. There's something culturally wrong as in Britain that this is allowed.
Okay, so do you think in this case the fact that these men all came from Pakistani Muslim families was not really the issue?
No, I don't think it was really the issue. No.
Okay, no, Aziz, you've made your point. It's not one that I agree with, but you have made your point very, very clearly. In fact, I disagree with it very strongly, but hey, that's what we do here on LBC. It is about genuine free speech and agreeing to disagree and attempting to do it in a relatively civilised sort of way. Theo on Facebook says, what sort of country is it when it's not able to protect its children? Well, Theo, you may well ask, where were the police forces? Where were the authorities? And Dennis McShane, who had previously been the MP for Rotherham, that all went rather wrong for him, but he did rather admit in The Guardian that perhaps, you know, for fear of being called racist, we weren't looking as hard as we should have done. Lee is calling from Leyland in Lancashire. Hello there.
Yep. Hi, Nigel.
Hi.
First of all, I want to pick up on what Atif had just said.
Yes.
I think he's just contradicted himself completely by saying that they're British-born men, but their culture is different. That's entirely the problem. The fact that they're Muslim Pakistanis, that is the issue, and I think it was right what was written in The Sun. 100%.
And Lee, why do you think the fact that they're Pakistani, whether they're born or not, but they're part of the Pakistani community and they're Muslim, why do you think that's led to this problem?
Well, I can only put it down to, their religion. The fact that it is written in a book to say that it's the done thing. It's right. It's acceptable. The previous caller.
We've had a caller already tonight saying that Muslims are taught to respect women. So why do you say they're told not to respect women?
Because there are extremist views and extremist interpretations to the same description.
Yes.
And I think that's what they're doing. They're taking it to an extreme.
Yeah.
And the people that are suffering are the children here that are being targeted in the likes of Rotherham. Another point that I'd like to make that I picked up on a previous call, which initiated for me to call in, was the guy that called before saying that why are we not talking about white paedophiles? Well, you tell me, a mass white paedophile gang that are out targeting thousands of girls.
Well, there are paedophile rings, but they're normally, from what I've read of it, they're normally gangs of 4, 5, 6, maybe maximum 10 people. It's certainly nothing on this scale in one particular town. And Lee, frankly, when these things are exposed, we do talk about it, and we absolutely do. Lee, I'm sort of with you. I think it is the children that are suffering. It is their families and relatives that are suffering. I'll tell you who else is suffering, Lee. Decent people who observe the Muslim faith, who live in those towns and cities, who are now all being looked at as suspects because of the behaviour of some.
Yeah, 100%. I don't agree that all of them should be painted with the same brush, because and it's definitely wrong.
And that's important. But Lee, do you think when Sarah Champion wrote, Britain has a problem with British Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls, do you think she kind of, with that language, led people to think she was referring to all Pakistanis?
Perhaps people could take it in that way, but the fact is, it's the peaceful majority that don't make the difference. It is a minority that make the devastating headlines, and that is the issue. It's the minority that are controlling the majority, and that's how people view all Muslims, because of a minority. And I disagree with it, but it is hard for people to tell the difference.
I think what you've identified is right, and I think there are some people, perhaps quite a lot of people, who've seen these cases and who say, gosh, they're all the same. And of course they're not all the same, but whichever way you cut it, the events of Rotherham and other cases have had a devastating effect on relations between communities in this country, and that's bad news for everybody. Lee, I thank you very much indeed for your call, and some very strong opinions coming in on Twitter. It gave the wrong impression and turned some people against minority groups, which was unfair to the majority in those groups who are not involved in grooming gangs or sexual violence. Christina, I get it, but I also get we're not just talking about abuse, it's sexual slavery. Sarah deserves a medal. Strong views all round. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It is now 7:30 and time for the news with Thomas Watts. Sarah Champion, who spoke out last year about what had happened in Rotherham and said and wrote in the Sun newspaper, Britain has a problem with British Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls, is really beginning to reap something of a whirlwind from people in Rotherham who now want her removed as Member of Parliament and are saying some pretty beastly things about her. Was she right or wrong to express things in the way that she did? And somebody else on my radar tonight is Gary Lineker. Absolutely. Well, of course, he's back from the World Cup. And he's now decided that blocking Brexit is more important to him than football. And he's thrown his support behind the people's vote. I thought we had one of those in 2016. Perhaps I was confused. There will now be a summer of action and a series of rallies and protests across the country, and Gary Lineker is absolutely four square behind it. Well, who knows? Maybe Gary Lineker is going to enter politics. We will have to see. And the other story that is really quite interesting is Jeremy Corbyn's big announcement about buying British, about making sure that big contracts in this country go to British companies. And in this, of course, he well knows This could only happen if we're outside the European Union single markets because of their rules on procurement. But fascinatingly, who did Jeremy Corbyn sound like when he was talking about buying British and basically putting British interests first? Actually, in many ways, he sounded a bit like Donald Trump, which I find really rather amusing. Let's get back to the serious stuff. Let's get back to Sarah Champion and her comments. The Sarah Champion debate touches the surface of broken Britain. Britain is divided along racial lines, but there is no debate about that. Does multiculturalism work? We are not allowed to ask that. I've never known a more irrevocably divided Britain. It's sad, says Jeff on Twitter. Well, I don't think we are as divided as you think we are, Jeff, on racial lines. I really don't. And I think we are seeing that maybe some parts of the country where there's a big problem, but we also see parts of the country where we've actually achieved quite good integration. Let's keep these calls coming. Lola is calling from the Docklands. Hello there.
Hi, Nigel. I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think there are many different factors that affect these men to behave in this way,
Okay.
Particularly their upbringing. I'm pretty sure that all of them are from working class families who probably took advantage of the welfare system and who haven't been teaching their kids no discipline and no etiquette whatsoever. And also there wasn't... I think you've mentioned the fact that they were all friends. So that's why I think this gang was in operation because they were friends. And so they felt a little more confident to do what they were doing. And what I think Sarah should have done, or the author of that article, she should have been a bit more careful and not painting all Pakistani men in this country with one brush, but saying rather that the youth they need to occupy their time, let's say after school, because they gradually come to this. They need to occupy their time more efficiently rather than just having free time all the time. And
Lola,
yeah.
Lola, let me ask you, why do you think that there are so many of these communities in northern towns and elsewhere where those, and you mentioned living on social security, where the percentage of those living on social security is so high?
Sorry, what's the question?
Well, I'm saying that if you look at many of the Pakistani communities in towns like Rotherham, a very high percentage of them are on some form of social security. Why is it that that group has the highest dependency rate on the state than any other ethnic group in this country?
I don't believe that's the case, but...
Well, it is. And I mean, I only mentioned it because you'd raised the point to begin with, that many of these people have grown up in houses where they're living on social security. You yourself said they're not being brought up with the right values. I just wonder why... much of the Pakistani community is getting left behind everybody else. That's really my question.
Okay. First of all, Pakistan is the Commonwealth, so why they are in big numbers in this country, I believe that's the case. And there are certain parts of this country that are densely populated by this particular minority group, like East London and Rotherham. So those people who have come here at back in those days are not necessarily the hard-working, probably, and so the generations have been living here in this kind of way, relying on the state, and so the growing up generation hasn't seen how to be a good citizen, how to be a law-abiding citizen, and maybe that has affected dramatically. But I wouldn't say that they are all that way. I think there is a very small minority of those. But if you come to East London, then you will see the Romanian gangs or the Bulgarian. I don't want to specifically name any other communities, but you get my point.
I do get your point, and I have to tell you, Leila, I went to a part of Oldham where virtually no one spoke English. I simply couldn't believe it. I really could not believe it. It was a disaster. But Lola, listen, there are causal factors here. There are perhaps people being brought up that treat women as in families where women are not treated with any sense of equality or fairness. But do you honestly think, given all of these things and given the statistics and the figures, when the independent report says that almost all the people that committed these rapes were Pakistani, surely Sarah Champion is right to point that out?
I wouldn't agree with that, and I would if I.
What should she say then?
First of all, I think that these men gradually come to that behavior because they got away with it for so long, and that's why it went on that level. So there was this advert on TV that was called "Disrespect Nobody," which taught men on how to not abuse women, what counts as the consent to sex or what doesn't count as one. So I think that in teenage years, that's when the state should educate men more.
A lot of this isn't just about consent. A lot of these girls were under the age of consent, weren't they?
I'm not too sure about that.
Well, plenty. I promise you, plenty were.
If they were, then these men have to be educated about what kind of what women they can approach, what they cannot do, because they are not taught in that way. Because sex is not the topic that they can discuss.
So let me just ask you.
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that these men came from the Pakistani Muslim community contributed to what they did?
No.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm getting one or two callers saying that, and I have to say, I think this is something of denial. I think it's denial coming from those who hate to see these things are happening in their own communities. And Sarah Champion was not, absolutely not, trying to say that all British Pakistani men are rapists, but she was pointing out that there is a problem, and she did so, I think, very, very bravely. She knew she'd get some stick for standing up and talking about what the independent inquiry had found. But now that she's receiving wholesale abuse and that security around her has to be stepped up, really makes me worry about where we're going in this country. If our elected members of parliament cannot tell the truth, whether other people like it being said or not, if they can't tell the truth, we have got a very real problem. I am not a Labour Party supporter. I'm not particularly politically a Sarah Champion supporter. But I do think she had terrific courage in calling this. And I think what's happening to her right now is disgraceful. Let's go to May, who's calling from Edmonton. Good evening, May.
Hello, Nigel. It's several comments I'd like to make.
Uh-huh.
And what's pretty obvious is that in this country there is a big divide, as we know, between people who are deemed to be white UK and belonging to England, and from those who, even though you were born here, could have a number of family members going back years, but you're never actually accepted. And the way that in which crime is reported is a lot governed by how you portray yourself, whether you're deemed to be white UK or non-white UK.
All right.
So I've worked with young people in a social care setting, and there were very prominent people, some of them within the government, some of them, very prominent places, who actually were also abusing children.
Oh, hang on, mate. I can't... we can't... I'm sorry, I'm going to end that there. Listen, I've no doubt there are some political figures, people in government who've behaved abominably over the last couple of 100 years, but we've really had enough, haven't we, of Nick and so-called Nick and people like this making all sorts of accusations against former prime ministers and goodness knows who, and I'm just not going to live with that. I honestly, strong opinions coming in. Of course she's right. These people shouldn't be able to hide behind their race, says Ian. Can you ask the question, if a group of white men were deliberately targeting non-white underage girls, would you recognise this as a unique problem? Well, I think we would. If something like that was proved to have happened, I think the levels of uproar would be quite unlike anything we'd probably ever seen before. And I think we're still ever so slightly dealing with this issue with kid gloves, and I think there are one or two people who are still in outright denial that there is a problem. Sarah Champion was not trying to demonise an entire group or race of people. She was identifying a problem, one that if we confronted much earlier, we could have caused a huge, huge amount of distress. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:45. Was the Rotherham MP, Sarah Champion, right or wrong to say Britain has a problem with British Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls? And a lot of you who are contacting us through text and through Twitter and on the lines are first-timers to this show. This subject has brought a lot of you in. Emma from Sheffield says, having been educated in Sheffield, just down the road, the Pakistani boys always targeted the white girls for casual relationships because it wasn't allowed in their own community. I was not surprised by Rotherham in any way, and Emma there highlighting what she sees as an important cultural difference. Ashish is yet another new caller to the show. He lives in Croydon. Good evening to you.
Good evening. People are missing a pattern, right? That's happening with all these cases. The victims are either white girls and in some cases Sikh girls and Hindu girls. The perpetrators are mainly Pakistani Muslim. Now, this pattern is emerging and people, and to me, it's a hate crime. Because the girls they target are very rarely girls from the Muslim community. They always seem to be non-Muslim girls, whether it's white girls, Sikh girls, or Hindu girls. Okay, so this disrespectful attitude to non-Muslim girls, in my view, is a hate crime, and it's not being recognised. And if people are going to say these guys don't know how, these grooming gangs don't know how to treat women, there's almost a double standard. They treat non-Muslim girls, Sikh girls, white girls, Hindu girls, disrespectfully, rape, abuse, etc., whereas the girls in their own Muslim community are protected and never touched. So, there is a double standard, and all these excuses about, oh, well, you're targeting an entire community. When was the last time your callers ever saw gangs of Sikhs in the courts in grooming, or gangs of Hindus? They're in the so-called Asian community. When was the last time you saw gangs of Hindus and Sikhs in the courts doing the same thing?
Can I ask you, Ashish, can I ask you what religious group you are part of?
I'm Hindu.
You're a Hindu, okay.
Yeah, and we've seen this in our community since the 1980s, but it was very rarely covered by the media. But now, obviously, the rest of the country is waking up to what these grooming gangs, who unfortunately come from the Pakistani community, they're missing the point. This is a hate crime. They don't target girls from their own community.
No, that is an interesting perspective. Was Sarah Champion right to call it the way she did?
Of course. I mean, we jump up and down with anger whenever we see newspaper headlines saying Asian grooming gangs. These aren't Asian grooming gangs. The word Asian is just used by some people for
it's because, Ashish, people are scared to say Pakistani or Muslim or both, because when they do, they receive the kind of abuse that Sarah Champion is now receiving.
Exactly, and how do you think Sikhs and Hindus feel when...
Listen, that is a point very, very well made. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for your call and for your perspective. Well done, Nigel and LBC, for talking about this subject. There is a problem, and we need to have an open debate without fear of being labelled racist. I get from Forex Traders UK on Twitter, we do need to have this debate. We should have had this debate many, many years earlier, and saved a lot of lives from being upset and damaged in the way they have been. This should have been happening years ago. Matthew is a new caller from Doncaster. Matthew, good evening.
Evening, Nigel. How are you?
Very well. Thank you for calling. You've never called me before. What's your view on what happened?